My name is Kristen, and at 32, I never imagined boarding a plane would feel like signing my own death warrant. After 10 years of building a new life, Grandpa Harold's funeral forced me back to the home I once fled. When Mom opened the door, her smile barely formed before Richard's fist connected with my stomach. His words stung worse than the blow. "This isn't your house anymore." Poor Richard. He never knew Grandpa had slipped me the deed papers years ago. Let me know where you're watching from, and hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever stood up to a bully. Trust me, what happens next is something you won't want to miss. The farmhouse where I grew up wasn't just a building, it was the heart of our family. Grandpa Harold built it with his own hands back in the 60s, crafting each room with care and consideration. The wraparound porch facing east caught the morning sun perfectly, and the kitchen windows offered a view of his prized vegetable garden that fed us through every season. My childhood was filled with the smell of fresh earth and Grandma Rose's cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. When Grandma passed away when I was 8, Grandpa stayed strong, helping Mom raise me while she worked 2 jobs. Amanda Sullivan, my mother, was beautiful but fragile, always searching for something she couldn't quite name. We were a small but mighty family unit, the 3 of us against the world. Grandpa taught me how to fix a leaky faucet, change a flat tire, and appreciate the value of what was ours. "This land is your birthright, Kristen," he would say, his weathered hands gesturing to the rolling 20 acres that had been in our family for generations. "Never let anyone take it from you." Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. At least until Mom met Richard Blackwell when I was 18. She brought him home after meeting him at the bank where she worked as a teller. He was charming at first, bringing flowers and complimenting Grandpa on his woodworking. I was preparing for college, excited about studying architecture, inspired by Grandpa's craftsmanship. The change in Richard happened so gradually, none of us saw it coming. His suggestions turned into criticisms. His helpful ideas became demands. Within 6 months of dating my mother, he had opinions about everything, from what she wore to how Grandpa should manage the property. "This place could be worth a fortune if you'd sell to developers," I overheard him telling Grandpa one evening. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding as Grandpa firmly responded, "This land isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." The tension grew thicker after that. Richard moved in despite Grandpa's reservations. Mom seemed caught between her father and her new boyfriend. Her eyes grew increasingly shadowed, her laughter rarer. When she announced their engagement, Grandpa took me aside. "Your college acceptance is your ticket, little one," he whispered, his eyes sad but determined. "Get your education. Build your life. Some battles can't be won head-on." The summer before I left for college was unbearable. Richard had taken over the east wing of the house, rearranging furniture and removing family photos that, in his words, cluttered the aesthetic. When I found him tossing Grandma's handmade quilts into a donation box, something snapped inside me. "Those aren't yours to give away," I shouted, grabbing the box. Richard's face hardened into a mask I would come to know all too well. "Your mother agrees this place needs updating," he said coldly. "Either get with the program or get out of the way." The final explosion came 3 days before I was scheduled to leave. Richard had thrown out Grandpa's collection of hand-carved birds, claiming they were gathering dust. Grandpa, normally so composed, went pale with anger. The shouting match that followed ended with Richard threatening to have the old man placed in a home. "This is still my house," he thundered, standing taller than his 70 years would suggest, "and it will never belong to someone who doesn't understand what it means to create something with your own hands." I left for Chicago with tears streaming down my face, Grandpa's tight hug still warm on my skin. As we said goodbye, he pressed a small metal box into my hand. "Don't open this yet," he whispered. "Keep it safe until you need it." The next 10 years passed in a blur of determination. I graduated with honors, secured a position at a prestigious architecture firm, and built a reputation for myself. My contact with home dwindled to birthday cards and occasional phone calls with Grandpa, who never complained but whose voice grew wearier over time. Mom called less and less, always when Richard was out, always ending the call abruptly if he returned. Grandpa's letters were my lifeline, filled with village gossip and updates on his garden. Between the lines, I read the truth. Richard's control had expanded. Mom had withdrawn further into herself, and the home I loved was changing beyond recognition. The call about Grandpa's heart attack came on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, he was gone. Mom sounded hollow when she called, her words tearfully chosen. "The funeral is Saturday," she said. "Richard thinks it's best if you just send flowers. Less disruption that way." Something in her voice, a thread of the mother I remembered, made the decision for me. "I'll be on the first flight," I said, already booking the ticket. The small metal blocks Grandpa had given me had remained locked in my desk drawer all these years. Before I left, I placed it in my carry-on bag, knowing somehow the time had come. The flight from Chicago to my small hometown in Pennsylvania took less than 2 hours, but it felt like traveling back in time. As the plane descended, I could see the familiar rolling hills now dotted with new developments and shopping centers. The town had changed, expanded in my absence, becoming something almost unrecognizable. "First time back?" the taxi driver asked as I climbed into his cab at the small regional airport. His friendly face was unfamiliar, another reminder of how long I'd been gone. 10 years, I admitted, giving him the address I still knew by heart. His eyebrows raised slightly. "The old Sullivan place, beautiful property. Shame about what's happening out there." My stomach nodded. "What do you mean?" He seemed to realize he might have spoken out of turn. Nothing, just heard there might be changes coming. Developers been eyeing that land for years." The drive-through town revealed more changes. The small bookstore where Grandpa bought me a new novel every birthday was now a vape shop. The diner where we celebrated my high school graduation had been replaced by a chain restaurant. By the time we turned onto the familiar gravel road leading to our property, my hands were shaking. The first sight of the farmhouse nearly broke me. The once immaculate white paint was peeling, the wraparound porch sagging in spots. Grandpa's gardens, once his pride and joy, had been mostly torn up, replaced with patchy lawn. A shiny black Cadillac sat in the driveway, looking entirely out of place. "You want me to wait?" the driver asked, concern evident in his voice as I paid the fare. "No, it's fine," I assured him, though I felt anything but fine. As I wheeled my suitcase up the familiar path to the front door, before I could knock, the door opened. Mom stood there, thinner than I remembered her. Her once vibrant blonde hair now dull and streaked with gray, despite her being only 52. Her eyes darted nervously over my shoulder before meeting mine. "Kristen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She moved as if to embrace me, then stopped herself, the half gesture somehow worse than no acknowledgement at all. "Mom!" I stepped forward, arms outstretched, determined to bridge the gap between us. That's when I heard heavy footsteps behind her. I had a split second to register Richard's face, flushed with anger, before his fist connected with my stomach. The blow knocked the wind out of me, sending me stumbling backward down the porch steps. Pain radiated through my midsection as I gasped for breath. "What are you doing here?" Richard snarled, looming over me. He had aged poorly, his once handsome features now bloated, his dark hair thinning. "Nobody invited you." "Richard, please," Mom whispered, her hand fluttering ineffectually at his arm. He shook her off without looking at her. I struggled to my feet, one arm wrapped protectively around my throbbing ribs. "Grandpa died. I have every right to be here." "You have no rights here anymore," Richard spat. "This isn't your house. It hasn't been for years. Go back to Chicago or wherever you've been hiding." Behind him, Mom stood with downcast eyes, offering no defense, no protection. This hollow shell wasn't the mother who had once defied neighborhood gossip as a proud single parent, who had worked double shifts to give me dance lessons, who had taught me to hold my head high no matter what. "Mom," I pleaded, searching for some sign of the woman I remembered. "You should go, Kristen," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "It's better this way." A honk from behind me made us all turn. The taxi driver had circled back, stopping at our driveway. He waved at me through the windshield, a clear offer of escape. "This isn't over," I told Richard, my voice steadier than I felt. "I came for Grandpa's funeral, and I'm going to be there." Richard's face contorted with rage. "Try to show up, and you'll regret it," he threatened, stepping toward me again. I retreated to the waiting taxi, pain throbbing in both my body and my heart. The driver said nothing as I climbed in. He just put the car in gear and drove away from the only home I'd ever loved. "The Pinewood Motel still around?" I asked, fighting back tears. "Yes, ma'am." He glanced at me with concern in the rearview mirror. "You okay? Need a hospital?" I shook my head, though my ribs screamed in protest. "Just need a room." At the motel, I examined the damage in the bathroom mirror. An ugly bruise was already forming on my abdomen, but I didn't think anything was broken. Physical pain I could handle. The image of Mom's defeated posture, her inability to meet my eyes, that was something else entirely. My phone rang as I was gingerly applying a cold washcloth to my bruise. The local number wasn't one I recognized, but I answered anyway. "Kristen, it's Sophia Hamilton." The voice from my past brought a fresh wave of emotion. Sophia had been my best friend throughout school, the maid of honor at my prom, my confidant, until distance had gradually silenced our communication. "Kristen," I said, my voice cracking, "how did you know I was back?" "Small town," she replied with the warmth I remembered. "Melvin, the taxi driver, called his cousin, who's married to my sister. Words fast. He said you might need a friend." The tears I'd been holding back finally broke free. Between sobs, I told her about my reception at my childhood home. "That bastard," Sophia hissed when I described Richard's punch. "You should press charges." "Not yet," I said, an idea forming as I remembered the weight of Grandpa's metal box in my luggage. After promising to meet Sophia for coffee the next morning, I finally opened the box Grandpa had given me years ago. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a set of legal documents with a handwritten note on top. "My dearest Kristen," it read in Grandpa's familiar scroll. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone, and things have gotten worse with Richard. What he doesn't know is that this house and land legally belong to you now. I transferred the deed to your name on your 18th birthday. The property can never be sold without your signature. Stay strong, little one. Love, Grandpa." Under the note lay the deed to the property, legal transfer documents, and a key I recognized as belonging to Grandpa's safe deposit box at the local bank. As I stared at the papers, the magnitude of what Grandpa had done to protect our family legacy washed over me. That night, my dreams mixed memories of childhood happiness with the nightmare of Richard's fist and Mom's empty eyes. Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzling, fitting weather for laying Grandpa to rest. I dressed carefully in a black dress I'd packed, applying extra concealer to the dark circles under my eyes. The bruise on my abdomen had deepened to a painful purple, but I stood straight as I entered the small community church where the service would be held. Heads turned as I walked in. Most faces I recognized, though aged by the decades since I'd seen them last. Mrs. Patterson, my old English teacher, the Jensen family who owned the farm adjacent to ours, Uncle James, Mom's brother, who lived 2 states away and visited rarely. Richard and Mom sat in the front pew. He had his arm around her shoulders in what might look like comfort to the uninformed observer, but struck me as pure possession. He stiffened when he spotted me, whispering something in Mom's ear that made her shoulders hunch further. I chose a seat several rows back, not wanting to create a scene. Uncle James immediately moved to sit beside me, his face a mixture of sadness and concern. "Kristen," he murmured, enveloping me in a brief hug. "You look like you haven't slept." "Long trip," I said, not ready to share the full truth. "How are you holding up? You and Grandpa were close." A shadow crossed his face. "Not as close these past few years." Richard made sure of that. The service began before I could ask what he meant. Pastor Wilson, who had baptized me as an infant, spoke warmly of Grandpa's contributions to the community, his generosity during hard times, his skill as a craftsman whose furniture still graced many homes in the county. "That's the secret to a smooth finish." After the service, the community gathered in the church hall for a reception. I found myself surrounded by neighbors, sharing condolences and memories. "Your grandfather was so proud of you," Mrs. Jensen said, patting my arm, "always showing us pictures of the buildings you designed in Chicago. He kept that garden going as long as he could." Mr. Thompson from the hardware store added, "Shame what happened to it this past spring when Richard brought in those landscapers." Throughout these conversations, I noticed a pattern. People lowered their voices when mentioning Richard. Their eyes darted around, as if making sure he wasn't in earshot. The picture forming was disturbing. Richard had systematically isolated Grandpa and Mom from the community that had always supported them. Uncle James cornered me by the coffee urn, his expression grim. "Richard's been pressuring Dad to sell pieces of the property for years," he said quietly. "Dad always refused, but the pressure got worse after his first heart attack last year. I tried to intervene, but Richard threatened to get a restraining order against me for causing trouble." My hand tightened around my coffee cup. "Why didn't you call me?" "I tried. Your number kept changing. The emails bounced back." He looked genuinely distressed. "Richard told everyone you wanted nothing to do with the family anymore, that you'd made that very clear." Cold anger settled in my stomach. "That's a lie. I wrote to Grandpa regularly. I called whenever I could get through." "I figured as much," Uncle James sighed. "Listen, you should talk to Thomas Wright, Dad's best friend since forever. They had lunch every Wednesday until Richard put a stop to it. Thomas might know more." I spotted Thomas across the room, a tall man with a shock of white hair, who had taught me to fish in the creek that ran through our property. As I made my way toward him, I overheard Richard speaking to two men in business suits. The old man's stubbornness was the only holdup. Richard was saying, "We can move forward with the development plans as early as next month. 30 luxury homes, a clubhouse, the works." Fury rose in my throat. I changed course, heading straight for the small group. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying enough to make nearby conversations pause. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding about the future of the Sullivan property." Richard's face darkened as he turned to face me. "This is a private business discussion, and none of your concern." "Actually, it's entirely my concern," I countered, feeling a strange calm despite the tension crackling between us. "No development decisions can be made without my approval." "Kristen," Mom appeared at Richard's side, her voice pleading, "don't make a scene. Not at your grandfather's funeral." "I'm not the one making plans to bulldoze his legacy before he's even in the ground," I replied, unable to keep the edge from my words. Richard grabbed my arm, fingers digging painfully into my flesh. "Take your hand off me," I said clearly, "or I'll add assault to the list of things we'll be discussing with the authorities." Richard's grip tightened momentarily, then released. "You were always a troublemaker," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Coming back here, stirring up problems when your mother is grieving. Selfish, just like your father." The mention of the father I'd never known was calculated to hurt, but I refused to take the bait. "Gentlemen," I addressed the businessman directly, "I suggest you verify who actually has legal authority to make decisions about the Sullivan property before proceeding with any plans. You might find the situation isn't as straightforward as you've been led to believe." I walked away, heart pounding but head high. As I headed for the door, needing air and space, Aunt Patricia, Uncle James's wife, caught up with me. "Kristen, wait. There's more you need to know. Your mother, we're worried about her. She's not been herself, staffed coming to book club, socials, even family dinners. Richard controls everything, money, phone calls, who visits, classic isolation tactics." The pieces were falling into place, each one more disturbing than the last. "Has he hurt her?" I asked, dreading the answer. Aunt Patricia's hesitation told me everything. "We've suspected, but Amanda denies it, makes excuses, and lately we haven't been able to see her alone at all." I squeezed her hand, promising to stay in touch, and continued toward the exit. In the small church entryway, I nearly collided with an elderly man in a well-shorn suit. "Kristen Sullivan," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Martin Atwood. I was your grandfather's attorney." I've been hoping to speak with you, Mr. Atwood. I recognize the name from the documents Grandpa gave me. I was planning to call your office Monday. He glanced over my shoulder at the reception. Best not to discuss matters here. Can you come to my office tomorrow, 9 a.m.? There are things your grandfather wanted you to know. Provisions he made. Before I could ask more questions, I felt a presence behind me. Richard stood there, eyes narrowed as he looked between Martin and me. Passing along gossip to the prodigal granddaughter, Atwood? His tone was light, but the threat underneath was unmistakable. Passing along condolences, Mr. Blackwell. Nothing more. Richard's eyes locked with mine, a clear message in them. This isn't over. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze steadily until he turned and stalked back to the reception. I left shortly after, the weight of revelations and unanswered questions heavy on my shoulders. Back at the motel, I spread Grandpa's documents on the bed, examining each one carefully. With determination replacing the fear that had initially gripped me, I began making notes, organizing questions for Martin Atwood. That night, my resolution grew stronger than my grief. Grandpa had given me the tools to fight back. Now I just needed the courage to use them. The offices of Atwood & Sons occupied the second floor of a red brick building on Main Street, the same location where they had dispensed legal advice to the community for 3 generations. The waiting room was unchanged from my childhood visits with Grandpa. Comfortable leather chairs, potted ferns, and framed black and white photos of the town's history. Martin Atwood greeted me with a firm handshake, ushering me into his private office, where thick legal volumes lined the walls and a large window overlooked the town square. Your grandfather was one of my dearest friends, and a great deal more perceptive than Richard Blackwell gave him credit for. I'm beginning to understand that. I placed the metal box on his desk. I found these documents. I'm hoping you can help me make sense of them. Martin opened the box, nodding as he reviewed the contents. Harold came to me almost immediately after your mother married Richard. He had concerns about Richard's character and intentions toward the property. The deed transfer. Was it legally binding? Absolutely, Martin confirmed, tapping the document. Harold structured it very carefully. He transferred ownership to you while maintaining life rights for himself. Your mother was aware of this arrangement and signed off on it, though I doubt she told Richard. The property cannot be sold or substantially altered without your consent. Relief washed over me. Then Richard's plans for development cannot proceed. But that's not all you need to know. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a thick file. Your grandfather documented everything. Richard's attempts to pressure him into selling, the arguments. He even recorded some of Richard's more threatening statements. My eyes widened.
Grandpa recorded him? Martin nodded grimly. After the second time Richard suggested Harold might be better off in a care facility, Harold started carrying a small recording device, legal in Pennsylvania with one-party consent. The recordings paint a disturbing picture of coercion, especially after Harold's health began to decline. He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Your grandfather left this for you as well. He asked that I give it to you personally if anything happened to him. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope, recognizing Grandpa's handwriting immediately. My dearest Kristen, it began. If you're reading this, I've passed on and Martin has determined it's time for you to know the whole truth. I've tried to protect both you and your mother, but Richard is a dangerous man, more dangerous than I initially realized. After you left for college, things deteriorated quickly. Richard isolated your mother, convinced her that her depression was worse than it was, that she needed him to manage everything. By the time I understood what was happening, she was already dependent on him emotionally and financially. I've documented his attempts to gain control of our property. He doesn't know about the legal protections I've put in place, and I've let him believe I might eventually be persuaded to sell. This buys time, but it won't last forever. The most important thing I've discovered is that Richard isn't who he claims to be. He has a history of targeting vulnerable women with assets, marrying them, and then taking control of their property. Martin has the details of 2 previous cases in other states. I'm sorry to place this burden on you, but you're strong, Kristen. Stronger than you know. I've always believed you have your grandmother's spirit. the quiet kind that bends but never breaks. Whatever happens, remember that the land is your birthright. Fight for it if you can, but more importantly, fight for your mother. She needs you, even if she can't say it. All my love always, Grandpa. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. I wiped them away, looking up at Martin. What are the next steps legally? I mean, first, we should run a complete background check on Richard, suggested Martin. I have some preliminary information, but a more thorough investigation might reveal additional leverage. Second, we need to document any damage or unauthorized changes to the property. And third, I would recommend consulting with Jennifer Blake. She's a specialist in family property disputes, particularly those involving potential financial abuse. How quickly can we move on this? I asked, remembering Richard's conversation with the developers at the funeral. I think he's planning to move forward with development plans very soon. I can have Jennifer here tomorrow, Martin assured me. In the meantime, I'll file a temporary injunction preventing any changes to the property pending legal review. That should buy us some time. The rest of the day passed in a blur of legal consultations and research. By evening, I had a much clearer picture of what we were dealing with. Richard Blackwell had been born Richard Peterson in Ohio. He had 2 previous marriages, both to women with significant assets, both ending when the women's resources were depleted. He had a record of fraud charges that had been settled out of court. Most disturbing were the restraining orders filed by both ex-wives, citing verbal and physical abuse. Jennifer Blake arrived the next morning, a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the case materials with rapid efficiency, occasionally making notes or asking clarifying questions. This is actually more straightforward than many cases I handle, she concluded. The deed transfer is ironclad. Richard has been engaging in fraudulent activity by attempting to sell or develop property he doesn't own. The recordings your grandfather made provide clear evidence of coercion and elder abuse. What's more concerning is your mother's situation. Can we help her legally? I asked. Yes, but it's complicated, Jennifer explained. Financial abuse leaves trails. We can follow bank records showing unusual withdrawals, transfers to accounts she doesn't control. The isolation tactics are harder to prove, but still part of the pattern. The physical abuse, she hesitated. It depends on whether your mother is willing to acknowledge it. From what you've told me, she's deeply entrenched in a cycle of abuse and dependence. We spent hours building a timeline, gathering documentation, and preparing legal strategies. Jennifer was confident in our case, but warned me about the emotional toll ahead. Richard won't give up easily, she cautioned. Men like him rarely do. When legal avenues fail, they often escalate to intimidation or worse. Are you prepared for that? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Mom's number flashed on the screen. I answered immediately. Kristen. She was hushed, fearful. I just wanted to check that you're okay. I'm fine, Mom. I heard the strain in her voice. Are you alone? No, Richard is just in the other room. I can't talk long. The sound of a door opening came through the line, followed by Mom's too bright voice. Yes, honey, I'm just confirming the grocery delivery. The call ended abruptly. Jennifer and Martin exchanged grim looks. We need to move quickly, Jennifer decided. First thing tomorrow, we present our documentation with Richard, with a cease and desist order regarding any property dealings. I'd recommend having law enforcement present, given his history of violence. That night, in my motel room, I barely slept. I pored over property records Martin had provided, discovering that Richard had taken out multiple mortgages against the farm using fraudulent documents. The money, nearly $300,000, had vanished into accounts we couldn't yet trace. The beautiful home Grandpa had built and maintained was being systematically stripped of its value, just as Mom was being stripped of her identity and independence. As dawn broke, I made my decision. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about justice, family, legacy, and most importantly, rescuing my mother from the prison Richard had constructed around her. With Jennifer's legal expertise and Grandpa's foresight backing me, I was ready to confront the man who had stolen so much from us. The morning sun cast long shadows as Jennifer's sleek sedan pulled up to the farmhouse. followed by a police cruiser I'd requested as a precaution. Officer Davis, who went to high school with me, nodded solemnly as he joined us at the front gate. "Domestic situations can be volatile," he reminded us. "I'll be present for peacekeeping only unless laws are being broken in my presence." Jennifer Blake looked impeccable in her charcoal suit, her briefcase containing all the documentation we'd need. I smoothed down my own blouse, fighting the flutter of anxiety in my stomach. This was it, the confrontation I had been both dreading and preparing for since discovering Grandpa's documents. Richard answered the door, his expression shifting from irritation to weariness when he saw Jennifer and the police officer. "What's this about?" he demanded, blocking the entrance. "Legal matters concerning the Sullivan property," Francis replied. "Is Amanda Sullivan Blackwell available as well? The discussion concerns her interests too." "She's resting," Richard said, his knuckles whitening on the doorframe. "Come back another time." "Kristen, who is it?" Mom's voice called from the inside, followed by her appearance in the hallway behind him. She looked even more exhausted than at the funeral, her hair hastily pulled back, wearing a faded housecoat despite it being nearly 10 in the morning. "Mom, we need to talk to you, both. It's important." Richard's jaw tightened, but with the police officer present, he grudgingly stepped aside. 20 minutes, that's all." The interior of the house struck another blow to my heart. The warm, welcoming space I remembered had been transformed. Grandpa's handcrafted furniture was gone, replaced by gaudy, mass-produced pieces. Family photos had disappeared from the walls, now painted a sterile white. Even the worn but beautiful Persian rug Grandma had cherished had been replaced by beige wall-to-wall carpeting. We gathered in the living room. Mom perched nervously on the edge of the sofa, while Richard remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Blackwell," Jennifer began, her tone professionally detached. "I'm Jennifer Blake, representing Kristen Sullivan in matters relating to the ownership and disposition of this property. I have documentation confirming that legal ownership of this property was transferred to Kristen Sullivan 10 years ago, with life rights reserved for Harold Sullivan until his passing." Richard's face flushed dark red. "That's absurd. The old man had no right." "He had every right," Jennifer interrupted, sliding the deed transfer papers across the coffee table. "As the legal owner, he was entitled to transfer the property as he saw fit. Mrs. Blackwell was aware of and consented to this arrangement at the time." Mom's eyes widened as she looked at the paperwork. "Dad did this?" "Furthermore," Jennifer continued, "we have evidence that Mr. Blackwell has attempted to sell portions of this property and has taken out fraudulent mortgages using forged signatures." She produced copies of the mortgage documents, pointing to the signature lines. "These are not Christian signatures, nor Harold's, yet they purport to be." Richard's composure cracked. "This is a setup. Harold was senile. These documents won't hold up in court." "They already have," Jennifer countered smoothly. "Judge Watkins reviewed them this morning and has issued a temporary freeze on all financial activities related to this property. Additionally, we've submitted a formal complaint regarding the fraudulent mortgages to the district attorney's office." Richard lunged forward, suddenly grabbing for the documents. Officer Davis immediately stepped between us. "Sir, I need you to calm down," he warned, his hand moving to his belt. "This is my house," Richard shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "These women have no right to come in here with their lies and accusations." "Actually, it's my house," I said quietly but firmly. "It has been for 10 years. Grandpa made sure of that because he saw exactly who you were." Richard's face contorted with rage. He took a step toward me, but Officer Davis blocked his path. "Sir, back up now," he ordered more forcefully. "Do you know what I've put up with?" Richard snarled, turning to Mom instead. "Your father's constant interference, your daughter's ingratitude. I've worked to improve this backward property, to make something of it, while you've done nothing but mope around feeling sorry for yourself." Mom shrank back, years of conditioning making her fold inward under his verbal assault. Something inside me snapped. "Don't talk to her like that," I said, stepping forward. "Not ever again." Richard's attention swung back to me. "You," he hissed, You've never belonged here, just like your worthless father, thinking you're entitled to what others have built." "Mr. Blackwell," Jennifer interjected firmly, "you should know we're also filing for an emergency protective order on behalf of Amanda Sullivan Blackwell based on documented patterns of financial and emotional abuse." "Abuse?" He laughed harshly. "Tell them, Amanda. Tell them how I've taken care of you, how I've managed everything because you couldn't handle it yourself." Mom looked between us, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "Richard has helped me," she said faintly, "with my depression." "Mom," I said gently, kneeling beside her, "when did your depression start? Before or after Richard moved in?" A flicker of realization crossed her face. Richard saw it too, and made a sudden move toward his office at the back of the house. Officer Davis followed quickly. "He's destroying evidence," I exclaimed, hurrying after them with Jennifer close behind. We found Richard frantically feeding documents into a shredder. Officer Davis unplugged the machine while Richard tried to block access to his desk. "This is private property," he shouted. "You have no right." "Actually, I have every right," I countered. "And based on Grandpa's recordings and these half-shredded documents, I'm guessing you're destroying evidence of financial fraud." Richard made one desperate lunge, not at the papers, but at me. His fist grazed my cheek as Officer Davis tackled him to the ground. "Richard Blackwell, you're under arrest for assault," Davis announced, securing handcuffs around Richard's wrists despite his struggles. "You have the right to remain silent." As Richard was being restrained, I noticed Mom standing in the doorway, her face ashen. "He hate you," she whispered again. "Yes," I confirmed, "just like he hit you, didn't he?" The dam broke. Mom crumpled against the doorframe, sobs racking her thin frame. "I'm sorry," she repeated between gasps. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you by telling you to stay away. He said he'd find you in Chicago if you ever came back here. Said he'd make sure you lost your job, your apartment, everything." While Officer Davis escorted a still struggling Richard outside and called for backup, Jennifer and I comforted Mom. Gradually, the story emerged. Richard's control had escalated after I left for college. He had convinced Mom her depression was worsening, that she couldn't trust her own judgment. He had isolated her from friends and family, monitored her phone calls, and eventually taken control of all finances. The emotional abuse had turned physical about 3 years into the marriage. "Dad knew, didn't he?" Mom asked as we sat at the kitchen table, the space so changed from the warm heart of the home it had once been. "He suspected," I confirmed. "That's why he legally protected the property. He was trying to protect both of us." A second police car arrived, and the officers discovered more than just fraudulent financial documents in Richard's office. There was an unregistered handgun, forged identification papers, and documents suggesting Richard had victimized other women before Mom. By evening, the immediate crisis had passed. Richard remained in custody, charged with assault, fraud, and several other offenses. Additional charges were pending as the investigation expanded. Mom, exhausted but finally free of Richard's oppressive presence, fell asleep in her old bedroom upstairs. I wandered through the altered house, grief and determination mingling as I cataloged the changes. The beautiful oak sideboard Grandpa had built for Grandma's 40th birthday, gone. The handmade quilts, the family photos, the small treasures that had once made this house a home. All vanished. In Grandpa's former workshop, now converted to a storage room cluttered with expensive golf clubs and boxes of Richard's possessions, I found a single remaining piece of Grandpa's craftsmanship. Pushed into a corner was the small cedar hope chest he'd made for my 16th birthday. Inside, miraculously preserved, were photo albums and family mementos Mom had managed to hide from Richard's purges. As I sat on the workshop floor, turning pages filled with images of happier times, I made a silent promise to Grandpa. I would restore what Richard had tried to destroy, not just the physical house, but the sense of safety, love, and belonging that had once filled it. For Mom, for myself, and for the legacy Grandpa had fought so hard to preserve. The weeks following Richard's arrest unfolded in a whirlwind of legal proceedings, emotional revelations, and cautious steps toward healing. Jennifer Blake proved invaluable, deftly navigating the complex intersection of criminal charges against Richard and the civil actions needed to reclaim what he had stolen. The preliminary hearing was scheduled quickly due to the nature of the charges. Richard, denied bail as a flight risk after investigators discovered a hidden bank account and passport under an alias, appeared in court in an orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to his usual polished appearance. Mom, despite her initial reluctance, agreed to testify. I sat beside her in the courtroom, watching her hands tremble as she detailed years of isolation and abuse. "He told me no one else would want me," she said, her voice growing steadier as she continued, "that I was lucky he was willing to take care of someone so broken. When I questioned anything, he would remind me of my depression, say I wasn't thinking clearly." As her testimony progressed, the prosecutor established a clear pattern. Richard had methodically separated Mom from her support network, controlled her medication, managed all finances, and created an environment where she doubted her own perceptions and capabilities. "Did he ever threaten your daughter?" the prosecutor asked. Mom nodded, tears welling. "He said he had connections in Chicago, that if Kristen interfered, he could make sure she lost her job, her apartment, that accidents happen all the time in big cities." Richard's face remained impassive throughout, but I caught the momentary tightening of his jaw, the flash of cold rage in his eyes when Mom revealed his threats. Outside the courthouse, we found unexpected support. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years approached with casseroles, offers of help with repairs to the farm, and sincere apologies for not recognizing what was happening sooner. "We should have checked on Amanda more," Mrs. Jensen said, embracing Mom gently. "We should have pushed harder when Richard started turning us away at the door." "He was very convincing," Mom replied, the ghost of a genuine smile crossing her face. "But I'm done being convinced." Back at the farm, we faced the daunting task of recovery on multiple fronts. The house itself needed considerable work after years of Richard's neglect of anything that wasn't immediately visible to visitors. More challenging was helping Mom reclaim her sense of self after a decade of systematic erosion. I hired Sarah Patel, a therapist specializing in domestic abuse recovery, who began meeting with Mom 3 times a week. Initially, Mom resisted, insisting she was fine now that Richard was gone. But Sarah's gentle persistence slowly broke through those defenses. "Recovery isn't linear," Sarah explained to me after one particularly difficult session when Mom suffered a panic attack while simply trying to choose what to make for dinner, a decision Richard had never allowed her to make. "There will be setbacks, moments where the old patterns reassert themselves. The key is consistency and patience." I extended my leave of absence from the architectural firm in Chicago, grateful for a boss who understood the gravity of the situation. Working remotely on smaller projects kept me connected to my career while allowing me to remain at the farm. 4 weeks after Richard's arrest, Martin Atwood called with surprising news. "Harold had a safety deposit box we've just gained access to. It contains savings, bonds, and certificates of deposit in Kristen's name, earmarked specifically for farm preservation. The total value is just over $180,000. This unexpected windfall meant we could begin restoring the property without waiting for the court to untangle Richard's financial fraud. I hired local contractors to repair the sagging porch, replace the leaking roof, and restore the gardens that had been Grandpa's pride and joy. As physical renovations progressed, family relations slowly mended as well. Uncle James and Aunt Patricia visited regularly, bringing cousins I'd barely seen since childhood. Mom initially withdrew during these visits, shame over what she saw as her failure making social interactions painful. But with each gathering, her confidence grew incrementally. Not all progress was smooth.
6 weeks into the legal proceedings, Richard's court-appointed attorney approached Jennifer with a proposal. Richard would relinquish all claims to the property and agreed to a quick divorce if Mom would decline to testify about the physical abuse in his criminal trial. "He's desperate," Jennifer explained as we discussed the offer. "The fraud charges alone could put him away for years, but the domestic violence charges in addition would essentially guarantee maximum sentencing." To my shock, Mom initially considered the offer. "Maybe it would be easier," she suggested timidly, "to just move forward without dragging everything into public view." This triggered our first real argument since my return. "He doesn't deserve an easier sentence," I insisted. "Not after what he did to you, to us, to Grandpa." Mom's eyes flashed with a spark of the woman she'd once been. "Don't you think I know that? But testifying means reliving every moment, Kristen. Every slap, every push, every time I was too afraid to stand up for myself or for Dad." We reached an impasse that evening, retreating to separate rooms with the question unresolved. The next morning, I found Mom sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunrise, a habit of hers from before Richard. "I'm going to testify," she said simply as I joined her. "Not just for us, but for whoever might come after me if Richard gets out sooner rather than later." The decision cost her. Each pretrial hearing left her exhausted. Each deposition drained her newfound strength. But something was changing too, a steely resolve taking root as she reclaimed her narrative. Meanwhile, I continued the practical work of restoration. While clearing Grandpa's workshop to convert it back to its original purpose, I discovered a cache of his hand-carved birds, carefully wrapped and hidden behind a false panel. Among them was a half-finished cardinal, Grandma's favorite bird, the wood bearing the marks of Grandpa's tools and the less precise indentations where he had once guided my small hands in learning his craft. These tangible connections to our past became touchstones for healing. Mom began cooking again, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she rediscovered recipes that had once brought her joy. I relearned the rhythms of the farm, the seasonal tasks that had structured my childhood years. 7 months after my return, we hosted our first family dinner in the restored dining room. The table, a replica of Grandpa's original creation, crafted by a local woodworker who had apprenticed with him years earlier, held more food than the 6 of us could possibly eat. Mom had spent 2 days preparing, her nervous energy driving her to recreate the Sunday dinners of my youth. "To new beginnings," Uncle James toasted, raising his glass, "and to Harold, who made sure this family had a second chance." As we ate and shared stories, some sad, many joyful, I watched Mom gradually relax, occasionally even laughing the rich, uninhibited laugh I remembered from childhood. The sound filled a space in my heart I hadn't realized was empty until that moment. Later that night, as we washed dishes side by side, Mom gently bumped my hip with hers, a playful gesture from before. "Thank you," she said simply, "for coming back. For fighting." I corrected her. "We both fought. We're still fighting." She nodded, hands steady as she dried a serving bowl. "Yes," she agreed, "and this time we're winning." 1 year after I boarded that flight home for Grandpa's funeral, the farm had transformed almost as much as we had. The white farmhouse gleamed in the spring sunshine, its wraparound porch restored to its former glory. Grandpa's gardens flourished again, though with my own architectural touches incorporated into the landscape design. The workshop hummed with activity as I divided my time between remote architectural projects and learning the woodworking skills Grandpa had begun teaching me decades earlier. Richard's legal troubles concluded with a decisive victory for justice. The evidence against him, bolstered by Mom's brave testimony and documentation from previous victims who came forward during the investigation, resulted in a 15-year sentence for multiple counts of fraud, forgery, assault, and elder abuse. The divorce was finalized, with Mom reclaiming her maiden name of Sullivan. "Amanda Sullivan," she said the day the papers arrived, practicing the sound of her reclaimed identity. I had almost forgotten who she was. The woman standing before me bore little resemblance to the hollow-eyed, frightened person who had stood silently while Richard struck me that first day. Mom, at 53, had rediscovered her strength. Her hair, freed from Richard's preferred dull brown dye, now showed its natural silver streaks. She had gained healthy weight, her movements no longer tentative and apologetic, but purposeful. Her weekly therapy sessions continued, but now focused more on growth than trauma. Sarah, her therapist, often remarked on the remarkable resilience Mom had demonstrated once freed from Richard's influence. "Some people rebuild their lives," Sarah told me during a joint session. "Your mother is reinventing hers. There's a difference." That reinvention included dividing her time between volunteer work at the local women's shelter and part-time employment at Riverdale Books, the new independent bookstore that had opened downtown. The owner, Daniel Matthews, a kind widower in his late 50s, had become a regular visitor at our Sunday dinners, a development I watched with quiet satisfaction. My own decision to split my time between Chicago and the farm evolved naturally. The prestigious architectural firm I worked for initially balked at a permanent remote arrangement, but my portfolio and reputation gave me leverage to negotiate. 3 weeks in Chicago, 3 weeks at the farm, created a rhythm that honored both parts of my identity, the urban professional and the country girl with soil under her fingernails. The most significant transformation of the property came from a decision that would have made Grandpa proud. We converted 5 acres of the farm into a community garden project, creating individual plots local families could use to grow their own produce. The waiting list grew quickly, and the formerly neglected land now buzzed with activity from spring planting through fall harvest. "Your grandfather always believed land should be productive," Martin Atwood remarked during one of his regular visits. "He'd approves of how you've honored his legacy while making it your own." Martin's observation captured what I had come to understand about Grandpa's wisdom. He hadn't preserved the property simply out of sentimentality or stubbornness. He had recognized that the land represented something more valuable than its market price: roots, history, and the foundation for future growth. His foresight in legally protecting it wasn't just about thwarting Richard. It was about ensuring I would have the time and space to recognize its true value. Mom found her own path to healing by reconnecting with the community Richard had systematically isolated her from. She rejoined her church choir, resumed friendships with women who welcomed her back without judgment, and slowly reclaimed her place in the social fabric of our small town. Her tentative friendship with Daniel from the bookstore blossomed gradually. Their first official date to the county fair sent her into a flutter of anxiety that reminded me she was still recovering. "What if I don't remember how to just be with someone?" she fretted, changing outfits for the 3rd time. "What if I say the wrong thing?" "There is no wrong thing," I assured her. "Daniel likes you for who you are, not who you think you should be." This simple truth, the permission to be authentically herself, had been denied to her for so long that reclaiming it was perhaps her greatest act of courage. My own unexpected romance developed with James Mercer, the local veterinarian who treated the elderly farm cat we discovered living in one of the outbuildings shortly after Richard's departure. James, with his quiet competence and respect for boundaries, couldn't have been more different from Richard. Our relationship progressed at a careful pace, built first on friendship and a shared love for the land. The most profound healing, however, came through our work with the Reclaim Foundation, a small nonprofit we established to help domestic abuse survivors navigate the legal and financial challenges of rebuilding their lives. Using our experience and a portion of the proceeds from selling a small undeveloped section of the property, we created resources specifically addressing property rights and financial recovery. When you're trapped in abuse, the practical barriers to leaving can seem insurmountable, Mom explained during an interview with the local paper about the foundation. Where will you live? How will you support yourself? What legal rights do you have? We're trying to answer those questions before they become roadblocks. On Grandpa's birthday in late April, we held a planting ceremony in his honor. The entire extended family gathered to plant a young oak at the edge of the community garden, its roots destined to grow deep into the soil he had tended so faithfully. As we patted the earth around the slender trunk, Uncle James cleared his throat. Harold once told me that good land will outlive us all if we treat it right. But what matters most is what we build on it. Not structures, but connections. Look around today. He built this family, this community, this legacy of caring for each other and the earth we share. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the farm, Mom and I sat on the porch swing just as Grandpa and I had done countless times in my childhood. The familiar creak of the chains, the scent of fresh earth and growing things, the gentle chorus of spring peepers from the creek, all combined in a moment of perfect peace. "Do you think we've done right by him?" Mom asked softly. "By his memory?" I considered the question seriously, looking out over the land that had nearly been lost but was now flourishing in new ways. "I think we've honored what mattered most to him," I answered finally. "Not by freezing everything in time, but by making sure his values continue, caring for the land and creating something meaningful with our hands, standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Mom nodded, leaning her head briefly against my shoulder. "I wish I'd found my courage sooner, but I'm grateful I found it at all." Grandpa used to say courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. By that measure, you're the bravest person I know. The home I returned to reluctantly 1 year ago transformed just as we had. Not by forgetting the past or pretending the pain hadn't happened, but by acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing to build something new and stronger on the foundation that remained. Have you ever had to stand up against someone who tried to take what rightfully belonged to you, or helped a loved one through a difficult recovery? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to hear more stories of resilience and healing. Remember that sometimes our greatest strength comes from facing our deepest fears, and the most beautiful rebuilding happens after the most devastating destruction. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the courage to face whatever challenges come your way.